This is Zombie Moon, a short story by Eric A. Shelman. Narrated by the author.
"I can't see the stars, Daddy,"
said Tabitha. "The moon is too bright, baby girl," said Martin. "Its glow makes the sky light up too much." Martin Tanner lay on his back beside his 6-year-old daughter, Tabitha. Together, a blanket beneath them, they stared up at the October sky, almost in the dead center of the field behind their home. Tabitha was quiet for a long time. Finally, her voice broke the silence again.
"Daddy,
"Yeah, baby?"
is it wrong to love the stars and hate the moon?"
Martin Tanner laughed. His little girl could do that. He rolled over and propped himself up on his elbow, resting his chin in the palm of his hand. "You don't hate the moon, Tabby Cat. It's called a cycle. You know how sometimes there's no moon at all?"
"Yeah. Where's it go?"
"Oh, it's still there, baby. You just can't see it."
"Like Mommy?"
she asked.
"You said she's with us, too."
"Yeah, baby, just like Mommy. I bet if we look hard enough, we could see her star." The girl lay there silently for a long time, staring at the wide-open sky above her.
"Daddy,
"Yeah?"
when the moon's not in the sky, is it hiding?
"In a way, I guess."
If I played hide-and-seek with the moon, I'd never try to find it. Then I could see all the stars, and I could see Mommy, and I could make wishes on the shooting ones."
Martin felt emotion overwhelm him. Christy had held on until just after Tabitha's 6th birthday, before releasing her grip on life. She had died of cervical cancer. That was 7 months ago. He sighed. "Well, that'd be one way to solve your moon problem, I guess, but you remember, just 'cause we can't see the stars doesn't mean Mommy can't see us."
"Okay."
After another minute or so of silence, Martin checked his watch to see it was 9:00 p.m. He sat up. "You about ready to go back inside, sweetheart? It's past your bedtime." Tabitha sat up and yawned. Her red hair, so like her mother's, shone in the moonlight as she turned her green eyes to her father.
"I guess so."
When she stood up, she said,
"Daddy, who's that?"
Tabitha pointed. "Who's who?" Martin sat up and followed his daughter's finger. Sure enough, a single figure walked along the gravel access road about 100 yards away. It wasn't possible to tell whether it was a man or a woman, but whoever it was, the person zigzagged, appearing unsteady on their feet. Martin stood and leaned down to take Tabitha's hand. He pulled her up beside him. "Not sure who it is, but they look like they might be sick."
"Hello?"
called Tabitha. The distant figure stopped, framed against the yellow circular glow of the only streetlight on the access road. The person's stance was as awkward as the gate, now wavering side to side, looking in their direction. "Eddie, is that you, man?" called Martin. His neighbor, Eddie Carter, lived in the house next door, but with 30-acre lots, it was a good walk to get from his door to Martin's. When he did visit, he would ride his ATV over. It wouldn't be like Eddie to hoof it. They lived just outside of Belglade, Florida, and the 6 homes off Canal Street were the last of the large private lots the owners had refused to sell off to United Sugar. The land had been in Martin's family since the early 1920s. The part of the town where his home was located was once known as Chosen, Florida, built on ancient Colusa Indian burial grounds. In 1928, when a hurricane known only as Okeechobee destroyed the meager muck dike in Lake Okeechobee, the land south of the lake, including the Tanner property, flooded under several feet of water. Over the 6 hours the storm raged, the winds and pounding rain further added to the complete destruction of every building in the small village. Thousands had died, drowned in the floodwaters. Hundreds of bodies were never recovered, their remains now likely resting atop those of long-dead Colusa Indians, whose ceremonial shell mounds, some reaching 70 feet high and 100 feet long, had years ago been dismantled and used for road paving material. Martin continued watching the man who did not respond to his call. He then wondered if it was one of his tenants, but any of them would have come from the opposite direction, and they often rode bicycles. A dozen years ago, Martin had contracted to build 10 duplexes on the north end of his property, with each side offering 2 bedrooms and 2 baths, for a total of 20 rental properties. Each unit leased for around $1,500 per month. He rented them out to the seasonal sugarcane workers, and since the season ran from October through March, this source of income provided him and his family a good, comfortable life. He did most of the maintenance himself, but often hired Eddie to do the more complex repairs during the off-season. The same tenants returned year after year, ensuring full occupancy. "Eddie, you hear me?" The person continued toward them, but still did not answer. Martin got a bad feeling. He took Tabitha's hand. "Come on."
"But is it Mr. Eddie?" she asked.
"I'm not sure, but whoever it is isn't answering. Let's get back to the house." He bent down and bunched up the blanket in his arms and took Tabitha's hand. They started walking back toward the house. When he was about 50 yards from his back door, he saw the person cutting down their angle, now moving directly toward them across the open field. Martin quickened his step, and Tabitha was having difficulty keeping up. He was practically running when he reached the back door and pulled it open. He went inside, saying, "Go on, get ready for bed, Pumpkin. I'm going to see who's out there."
"Okay, Daddy."
Tabitha ran toward the hall and turned right to her bedroom. Martin watched until she disappeared around the corner before moving to the gun cabinet and pulling a key from his pocket. He opened the case and removed a Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun and a box of shells. He glanced toward the door as he loaded the shotgun. As he slid the last shell into the gun, he heard Tabitha call,
"I'm ready, Daddy."
He stood and pumped around into the chamber. "Just say your prayers, little girl," he called. "I'll be there in just a few minutes." He loaded the weapon to capacity with 8 shells and walked toward the back door. When he stepped onto the porch, the person was 20 yards away, but now seemed to be unsure where to go. Whoever it was just wandered in circles. Martin moved off the porch, the gun barrel aimed toward the ground. "Hey," he said. The figure turned. It was clearly a man, but even in the bright moonlight, Martin wasn't sure who. He could now see he wore a short-sleeved button-down shirt and baggy long pants. He resumed his awkward trek toward his house. "You don't answer me and you keep coming this way, you're going to get some buckshot in your belly," warned Martin. "Your call." Moving out of the shadows of the soaring pine trees that dotted his property, Martin now saw it was a man. He didn't know him, or at least he didn't think so. They'd lived in the area for over 15 years, and he knew everyone except passers-through and most of the temporary workers. "I said stop!" shouted Martin, now directing the shotgun's barrel straight at the man. Still, he didn't slow his jittery forward motion. "Man, are you drunk? 'Cause I'm going to have a hard time explaining to the police why I shot a drunk guy." Still, the man staggered forward. "Oh, shit, man," said Martin. He raised the shotgun's barrel and fired it into the air. The boom shattered the silence of the night. The stranger's face was now very clear, and Martin was glad to see it wasn't Eddie. Nor was it any of his tenants. The man stopped briefly at the sound of the gunshot, but only raised his face to the sky, as if searching for the source of the explosion.
"Daddy?"
came the voice behind him. Martin spun around, standing between Tabitha and the approaching man. Tabitha now stood on the stoop outside the door, craning her neck to see around Martin. "Baby, get back in the house right now, okay?"
"But is that Mr. Eddie?"
she asked. He turned to see the man closing in, now just 10 feet from him, his arms reaching.
"Daddy, what's wrong with him?"
said Tabitha, fear in her voice. Martin didn't hesitate. He spun on his heel and ran toward the house. With one motion, he scooped up Tabitha and charged through the door, slamming it behind him. He spun the deadbolt and the knob lock and put her down. "Run to your room, baby. Close your door and don't come out."
"I'm scared,"
she said, her face wrinkling as she began to cry. She wore her jumper pajamas, decorated with jack-o'-lanterns, witches, and ghosts. Once October came around, she refused to wear anything else for the entire month. Halloween was her favorite day of the year. "Don't be, honey. Whoever it is, he's probably just had too much to drink. You get in your room, like I said."
"Why'd you shoot your gun?"
she asked, still not moving. I tried to scare him off, that's all. Now go, Tabby. Do what I say." A sound came at the back door, and he turned toward it again. Scraping and dull tapping on the glass. "Go," whispered Martin. Tabitha obeyed. He went to the door and parted the curtains, spanning the upper and lower rods. The man's face was so close to the glass that Martin started and jumped away, his heart pounding. A huge flap of bloody flesh hung down from the man's cheek. His left eye was completely white, as though thick with cataracts, and his other eye appeared to be missing, just a bloody dark hole. Blood streaked the glass where his fingers had drawn down it. "What the hell?" whispered Martin. Chills rocketed down his spine as he stood there, reaching for his cell phone. The small curtain still parted, the man pressed his face to the glass, his tongue flitting in and out of his mouth as he pawed at the closed door. Martin turned away, deciding to use the house phone. He wasn't certain the address would show up on the cell phone, and he didn't want to take any chances in the event something went wrong before the emergency responders could get there. Picking up the phone, he dialed 911. It rang an unusually long time before the emergency operator picked up the phone. 911, what is your emergency?" It was a woman's voice, and she sounded harried. "Ma'am, this is Martin Tanner. I live at 154 Canal Street North in Belglade, and there's a man outside. He looks really hurt, but he might be dangerous."
"Sir, why do you think he might be dangerous? You just said he might be hurt."
"Pardon me?" said Martin.
"I asked you why you believe he may be a danger,"
repeated the operator. "Ma'am, the guy clearly needs help, and from the looks of him, he might be delusional or something, which is why I'm worried for me and my daughter. Just send somebody, please."
"Sir, it's just that we're inundated with calls right now from all over the county. I don't know what's going on out there. The dispatch has been instructed to prioritize based on need."
"What kind of calls are you getting?" asked Martin, staring at the man at the window. He thought he saw something move behind him.
"We'll get someone out there, but it may be a while,"
she offered, ignoring his question. "Don't hang up, please," he said, walking back toward the door. Doing his best to ignore the man pressed against the glass, he looked past his damaged face and saw several other dark shapes approaching his house. He spoke softly into the phone. "Other people are coming toward my house now. This is really weird."
"Sir, maybe they're friends of the man at your door."
"I don't know yet, so just hold on a second." The man seemed to be growing more frantic, so Martin left the door and walked into the kitchen, parting the curtains there. Sure enough, 6 other people, walking similarly to the man now standing at his back door, approached. Their faces were slack, their mouths all hanging open. A sound like a snarl or a growl grew louder, and he realized it came from the group of people. "Holy shit," he whispered.
"Sir, are you all right?"
"No, I mean, I'm okay now. I recognized a couple of them out there, but they're not right. They look like they're all, I don't know, in a trance or something. They're shuffling and moaning. Now they're up on my back porch." An impact shook the door in its frame. "Daddy!" came a shout from behind him. He turned to see Tabitha holding her favorite stuffed animal, a 2-foot flamingo she called Pinky. Into the phone he whispered, "This is serious. Get someone here as soon as you can." He put the phone on the counter and hurried to Tabitha, picking her up.
"Someone's outside my window, Daddy. A lady, and she's naked."
"What?" he asked, incredulous. He put her down in the hallway and said, "Stay here and don't move." He rushed into her bedroom, leaving the light off. He went to the window and parted the curtain. As Tabitha had told him, a fully nude woman stood there, her hands clawing at the window in a similar manner as the man at the back of the house. She was a small woman with a somewhat distended stomach, and had blood smeared across her face and breasts. Both of her eyes were intact, but also had the same milky film over them. She was clearly Hispanic, and Martin thought he recognized her as one of his tenants. Lucinda, her name might have been, but she and her husband were new tenants, so he couldn't be positive of her identity. Seeing him, she slapped her open palms against the glass, and it cracked, one 2-inch corner of the window pane falling away. Her fingers immediately prodded the hole. As he watched in fascination and horror, she pushed her hand forward, breaking through the glass as it sliced deep into her knuckles and wrist. Martin stared. The cut did not bleed. It opened to a dark crevice, but no blood gushed from it as it should have. Now her arm, pushed through to her elbow, reached toward him. Martin turned and ran back out of the room and went to pull the door closed behind him. Thinking twice, he reopened the door again and grabbed a jacket and shoes from his daughter's floor. He then yanked a drawer open and pulled out a pair of red denim pants, a yellow t-shirt, and socks for Tabitha. He hurried back to the hallway and again closed the door.
Daddy, who are those people?
Come on, Tabby. Let's get you dressed. I don't know who they are, but I think they're sick. Don't be scared, but hurry. He turned on the light in the bathroom and closed the lid of the toilet. Pull off your pajamas. Sit here and put on your clothes. Socks and shoes, too. Hurry, baby. Don't come out. I'll come in for you when I'm ready.
Daddy, I'm scared,
she cried. I know, Tabby. I'll take care of you. Just get dressed. He left the room and closed the door, retrieving his shotgun from the spot where he leaned it against the wall. Now the door rattled in its frame, and he could no longer see through the window, so many bodies pressed against it. Running back to the kitchen, he again peered through the window there. At his parting of the curtains, several of the faces turned toward him, and the crowd shifted as one, now stumbling toward the kitchen. Martin ran back to the phone and picked it up. Again he dialed 911. It rang and rang. He finally hung up. A crack came from the door, and he spun around to see glass on the floor at the base of the door. "Shit!" he said, and hurried to the gun case. He removed a .45 caliber 1911 from the top shelf and 2 boxes of ammunition for the weapon. It wasn't off-brand, but he'd always wanted a 1911, so he purchased it anyway. As it turned out, it was made in Turkey and was a solid weapon. Another impact, and more glass fell to the floor. With shaking hands, he loaded the 2 magazines for the .45 and pushed one into the gun, chambering around. He stuffed the pistol into a clip-on holster, secured the security strap, and clipped it onto his jeans, dropping the other magazine into his pocket. Likewise, he took a Ruger 380 Auto from the shelf as well, and put it into his other pocket. Pulling multiple ammo boxes from the shelf, he grabbed his backpack and stuffed the items into it. Picking up a light jacket from over the back of his favorite TV-watching chair, Martin pulled it on before grabbing the shotgun again and pointing it at the door, ready. His finger pressed lightly on the trigger, but he did not fire. It would frighten Tabitha. Hell, he was scared out of his wits, if he were being honest. He'd never shot a person before, and it was beginning to look like tonight would be the night. Now multiple arms reached through the broken window, the glass cutting them. But again, the wounds were dry. None of the reaching arms attempted to find the deadbolt. Backing away, not taking his eyes from the door, Martin felt around on the coffee table for the TV remote. He hit the power button. It came on to local channel 2, the NBC affiliate. Whatever show had been on was now a breaking news alert. A worried-looking blonde woman stared at the screen from the news desk. The crawl at the bottom of the screen read, "Outbreak causing mass illness. Victims drawn to uninfected population." Martin jerked his head from the door to the television. He glanced over to see Tabitha was still in the bathroom as he had instructed. The news reporter said, "The outbreak has affected nearly all of South Florida. The first reports coming in from Glades, West Palm, Hendry, Lee, and Collier counties. Emergency responders are inundated, so it is being recommended that people stay in their homes with the doors secured, as help will not likely arrive soon. The cause of the outbreak is as of yet unknown, but the CDC is aware of the issue and is dispatching teams where the outbreak has been reported. Due to the unknown nature of the outbreak, Channel 2 has chosen not to send our field reporters out to investigate." A loud thump came from Martin's right. He ran to the bathroom and pushed open the door. Tabitha sat on the toilet, fully dressed, Pinky clutched in her arms.
"Daddy!"
"Baby, okay?"
"No," she whimpered. "I'm scared."
"Be brave, baby. Come on." She got up and went to him, holding out her arms. He bent down and picked her up, shifting his shotgun to his other hand. "I think we should get in our car and go," he said. "They're all around the back of the house."
"Okay,"
she said. He went to the front window and lifted the horizontal blind, peeking out. Nobody was in the front of the house yet. His Jeep Cherokee sat in the driveway. Martin turned and carried Tabitha into the kitchen, where he retrieved the keys from a hook on the wall between the kitchen window and the back door. As he pulled them off the hanger, the door jamb shattered, and the door flew open, bodies tumbling inside and landing on the floor. Tabitha screamed. Martin charged into the living room, put Tabitha down, and turned toward them. "Turn around, Tab," he shouted. "Face the front of the house." She did as he said, but her wails grew more piercing. Martin raised the shotgun and fired toward two sick men who had gotten to their knees and were halfway to their feet. Chunks of their faces and likely their brains sprayed the wall beside the door, and they dropped hard to the floor, now lying still. 4 or 5 more people, all wearing the earth-tone-colored clothing of the cane field workers, clambered over the fallen bodies, snarling as they pushed forward. Tabitha screamed, and Martin whirled around. She stood facing the carnage Martin had caused, her eyes wide. There was no time to do anything about it. Martin blasted the shotgun again and again, taking out the rest of the people breaking into his home. "Daddy, no!" she screamed, and he turned to pull her into his arms again. Another thump came from Tabitha's bedroom, but he wasn't going there. He knew that Lucinda had probably broken through the window and was now at his daughter's bedroom door. Another peek out the front window. One figure roamed out there. It now approached the front of the house, but it was not near the door. These people did not move fast. Martin thought he could make it if he didn't hesitate. "Pull your hoodie up, baby," he whispered, "over your head, and close your eyes until I tell you to open them, okay?" Tabitha said nothing, but nodded her head quickly and pulled her hood on. She kept her hand on it, pulling it down low over her face. Martin turned the front lock and yanked the door open. He pushed the screen door open and charged down the walk. The figure wandering in the front yard turned toward him, but as he'd expected, did not increase its speed. With a double chirp, the Jeep's running lights blinked twice. Martin reached the Jeep and pulled open the passenger door, dropping Tabitha into the seat. He slammed it, then opened the rear door and threw his backpack and shotgun inside. He slammed the door and rounded the corner behind the Jeep. Out of the darkness a figure appeared, but it was too late to slow. He ran smack into the person, their heads impacting hard. Swirling darkness closed in on Martin. As his vision became a smaller and smaller tunnel of blackness, he felt his legs crumple beneath him. Martin had no idea how long he'd been out when his eyes cracked open. Someone was jostling him. Memories flooded back to him, and he began to fight the person. "Marty," said the man, "knock that shit off and let me help you the hell up." Martin's vision slowly cleared, and he focused on his neighbor, Eddie Carter. "Eddie?" he moaned. "Yeah, who you think it was, fucking Santa Claus? Get your ass up. Fucking people going insane." Martin allowed Eddie to pull him to his feet. He quickly recalled what he'd been doing before he fell. "Did I run into you?" His eyes searched the yard for the man who'd been wandering there on his exit from the house. "Hell yeah, you did," said Eddie, rubbing an angry knot on his forehead. "I about got knocked out just like you. Now get your ass moving. Let's get in that Jeep with your daughter. She's about the only one got any sense around here." The men hurried around and Martin pulled the door open and got inside. Eddie jumped into the back seat. "Go!" he commanded. Martin shook away the cobwebs and reached for the keys. They weren't there. "Shit!" he said. "Daddy!" said Tabitha. "Sorry, baby." He turned. "I must have dropped the key when we collided," he said in a low voice. Martin looked around outside and saw 2 more figures shuffling around in the distance. Eddie pulled a small LED flashlight from his pocket and held it up. "I get him. You stay here. You took that knocking worse than me." Pulling the knob, Eddie pushed the door open and jumped out. From his left, around the corner of the house, a figure emerged. Eddie had left the door open and was behind the Jeep, searching for the keys. Martin honked the horn once, twice, then pressed it hard and didn't let off. The Jeep bounced and the rear door slammed. As Martin went to turn, gooseflesh rising on his neck, he felt a hand on his shoulder and heard jingling. "Take these damn things and start this car!" With a sigh of relief, Martin jammed the key into the ignition and turned the engine over. Slamming the transmission into reverse, he jammed his foot on the accelerator. "Buckle up!" he shouted, turning to navigate out of the driveway. Before he made it to the street, he slammed into a body that had emerged from the lawn. It went down, and he felt his wheels lift up and come back down hard. Cranking the steering wheel, his front wheels hit the same thing, and he kept on rolling. "Go, go!" shouted Eddie. "Don't even think about stopping."
"Daddy!"
screamed Tabitha. 4 people wandered aimlessly in the street before them. Martin cranked the wheel back and forth, zigzagging between them, making it through the cluster of bodies. Open road lay ahead. "What the hell's going on, Eddie? Do you know?" he asked. "Sick damn people," he said. "Delirious, attacking everyone. Whole bunch of 'em got Toby."
"Toby?" asked Tabitha. "Is he okay?"
Toby was Eddie's cocker spaniel. Tabitha liked to go over and play with him almost every day. "Oh, he's fine, sweetheart," said Eddie. "I left him locked in the house with food and water."
"You said they got him,"
said Tabitha. I meant they almost got him," he said. "They was chasing him." "Where should we go?" asked Martin. "Any ideas?" "Out of here is all I got right now," said Eddie. "Tabby, you okay, darling?"
"I'm scared,"
she said. "Well, you got your pinky there, so keep hold of her, okay?" Tabitha clutched the flamingo in her arms. Martin drove south toward the access road that would lead them out of the sugarcane fields. "You got enough gas?" asked Eddie. "Yeah, just filled it up yesterday," he said, checking his watch. It was now 10:15 p.m. "Now if I just knew where to go." "Not sure, friend. Know anyone with a brick house and hurricane windows?" Martin was drawing a blank. He reached over and took his daughter's hands and squeezed them. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting her fear. "Try to close your eyes, baby. You have to be tired."
"I'm not tired," she said. "I'm scared, and I want to be home."
"We'll go back there once the police get those people taken care of," said Martin.
"What's wrong with them?"
she asked. "They're sick, Tabby," said Eddie. "Gone crazy, I guess. Must be something in the brain or whatnot." Eddie Carter was a rail-thin black man in his 50s, about 5 feet 11 inches tall. He'd been a widower for 10 years and a local handyman for far more. He had short gray hair and he wore gold-rimmed glasses. He did everything from small construction jobs to painting, roofing, and even laying tile. When Martin needed more complex repairs done on his rental units, Eddie was the man he called. The dog Eddie had owned before Toby, a German shepherd, had also been named Toby. Martin asked him about it, and Eddie had explained that early-onset Alzheimer's ran in his family. Eddie wanted to be sure he never forgot the dog's name, so he named them all the same thing. "Seems to me the water's the best place to be," said Eddie. "Maybe we get to Lake O and see what's what. Maybe some guys there have some ideas." No matter what time of day or night, fishermen and others congregated at Slim's Fish Camp on the south edge of Lake Okeechobee. Martin didn't know if that was the best idea, but he hadn't come up with anything else. He reached Highway 80 and turned right. Not a car was in sight as he increased his speed to 75 miles per hour. "Follow it around till it turns north, then make a right on Levee. That'll get us to Lost."
"We don't want to get lost," shouted Tabitha.
"Not that kind of lost, child," said Eddie. "It stands for Lake Okeechobee Scenic Trail. It'll take us up to Slim's. I'm sorry, baby girl, didn't mean to scare you." Tabitha sniffled.
"That's all right."
The yellow sign for the dollar store appeared on the right, and Martin prepared to turn by slowing and merging into the right lane. The distant taillights of 2 other vehicles could be seen ahead when they rounded the curve and passed by the South Bay Shine car wash. Even as Martin pressed the accelerator and gained speed, the cars, if that's what they were, became tiny dots before winking out. They drove in silence past defunct bait shops and ragged buildings. Even the Jiffy Mart didn't make it out here. When he reached Levee Road, Eddie said, "Right here." Martin did not bother mentioning that he'd lived in the area a good long time and knew his way around the lake. Instead, he made the turn, and when he reached the transition to the scenic highway, he eased the Jeep left. Soon he saw the lights of Slim's Fish Camp ahead. "Looks like some people over there," said Eddie, leaning forward, his face beside Martin's. "Maybe we just drive up, maybe unroll the window for now. See what other folks are doing." Martin turned into the parking lot and glanced over at Tabitha. She had finally dozed off. Martin knew she had to be exhausted after everything they'd gone through. He envied her slumber, but was thankful she was out. "Now, let's keep quiet until we figure out what's happening here. I'd just as soon she be unaware of it all." "Yeah, I agree," said Eddie. "Hey, that's Frank Delano's truck right there," he added, pointing. "Probably getting his boat ready." "Sure, if he doesn't know what's going on," said Martin. Suddenly, Eddie slapped Martin's shoulder. "Marty, Frank's got a houseboat docked over here, about a 30-footer. You seen it before? He called it the Radio Flyer 'cause it's painted red like the wagons." Movement from his left caught Martin's attention. "What are those guys doing over there?" he asked, pointing at the walkway beside the main building for Slim's. Several men were down on their knees, hunched over something. "Man, I bet someone collapsed or something. They might be doing CPR." "Yeah, pull closer," said Eddie. Martin guided the Jeep around the corner, and more of the marina came into view. "Hey, there's Frank's houseboat," said Martin. "Lights are on inside. He must be in there." "I guess he ain't fishing," said Eddie. "Figured he'd be getting his Ranger ready." Martin's headlights fell on the huddled men. Two of them lifted up and turned toward them. Bloody chunks of gore covered their faces. They slowly got to their feet as the others around them seemed to drop lower. Atop what Martin could now see was a body. No, it was two bodies. "Eddie," Martin whispered. "Those men, are they?" "My God, Eddie! He's eating those goddamn people," he breathed. Something hit the Jeep on the passenger side, and Eddie gasped. "Back it up, Marty. Do it now. Drive your ass over close to Frank's boat." Bloody hand smears obscured the glass on the rear passenger side, and the hands continued to touch the Jeep until Martin backed away. He saw it was another strange-looking man in fishing gear, only he was in no condition to fish. As the headlights spun away from him, he staggered toward the feeding crew by Slim's fish camp. "I need to get my daughter to safety," said Martin. "Eddie, what do you think?" "I think we need to get on the water. Ain't nobody going to get us out there. This is bound to get worse. Let's see if Frank is there." Eddie moved to the passenger side and lowered the window an inch. The sound of an idling motor met their ears. "You see smoke coming off Frank's boat?" asked Eddie. Martin squinted toward the radio flyer. Sure enough, light puffs of smoke came from the rear. "Eddie, I think that's his engine running. Can we get there?" After a few seconds, Eddie said, "Drive this thing right out on the dock, Marty. It's wide enough and it'll hold it. We can get to within 20 yards or so. Then we just gotta hoof it." "And what if he tells us to take a hike?" asked Martin. "If he knows what's good for him, he won't," said Eddie. "I've known that dickweed for 25 years. Done lots of work for him. Cheap. Hell, he owes me enough for me to confiscate that damn houseboat." "So we take a chance?" asked Martin. "I say we do," said Eddie. "I gotta take a piss, too. Let's move." Martin turned the wheel left and drove down a steel ramp that led to the main dock. When he got to the bottom, the front cowling scraped the decking, but the Jeep eventually leveled out, undamaged. Martin eased it forward along the dock. The end spaces accommodated the larger boats, which meant heavier-duty cleats. Martin drove until the oversized cleats made it impossible to squeeze between them. He put the Jeep in park and turned off the engine. Both men looked around. "Nobody out here," said Eddie. "I'll get out and go around to get Tabitha. Can you manage my shotgun in that backpack?" "Yep," said Eddie. "Let's go." They opened their doors. The moment Martin stepped out, he spotted a man staring at him from the deck of a pontoon boat docked about 15 yards away. He had to pass the boat to reach the radio flyer. "Eddie, you seeing this?" he asked. Eddie turned to follow Martin's gaze. "What kind of weapons you got in that bag?" he asked. "Come here," said Martin. He stood by Tabitha's door, and when Eddie came around, he reached into his pocket and withdrew the Ruger. "Here, it's loaded, so if you need it, I guess you should use it." "I hope it don't come to that," said Eddie. He threaded his arms through the straps of the backpack and situated it. With the .380 in one hand and the shotgun in the other, he said, "More folks coming this way. Let's get moving." Martin looked, and sure enough, several people were staggering toward the ramp leading down to the dock. He glanced back at the man in the pontoon boat and saw he had moved to the low front railing and stood there, wavering back and forth. It was not due to the lake's water, only a light breeze now. It was still and flat. Opening the jeep's door, Martin reached in and unbuckled Tabitha's seatbelt, lifting her into his arms. She snuggled against him and moaned, but did not awaken. Unable to run while carrying his daughter, Martin walked as fast as he could behind the jogging Eddie. The dock where the radio flyer was tied up was narrower than the main dock by 5 feet. The boards were curled and splintered, and Martin had to watch to avoid tripping in the meager light. Eddie slowed as he neared the man on the pontoon boat. When the man staggered forward, Eddie raised the Ruger and said, "Stay right there, man." The man swayed back and forth, then staggered backward, only to catch himself. He said, "I don't know what's happening to them people. They're crazy." Martin breathed a sigh of relief. He had slurred his words badly, and now Martin realized the man was drunk, not sick. "You ain't too drunk? I suggest you get that boat out to the middle of the lake, friend," said Eddie. "Those folks is attacking and killing people." "Oh, my God," said the man. "I better—" He didn't finish his sentence, but turned and staggered toward the helm and dropped into the captain's chair. Eddie turned. "Come on." They continued on past the boat. Martin realized he couldn't worry about the man. He had his daughter and Eddie to protect if it came to that. They approached the houseboat, but Martin saw nobody outside the cabin. Eddie stopped right behind the boat. The motor was indeed running, but the dock lines were still tied around the cleats, and Martin didn't hear anyone talking from inside the cabin. "Eddie, has Frank got any family around here?" Eddie shook his head. "Nope. They lived up in Jacksonville from what I know. He stays out on the fly lots of nights, drinks and fishes." "You think he's passed out inside or something?" asked Martin. "Only one way to find out," said Eddie. He dropped the backpack on the dock and looked past Martin. "Shit, man, they coming." Martin turned. There were 4 people turning to the smaller dock. They were about 50 yards away. Martin said, "Eddie, just get in the boat. I need to get Tabitha away from those things." Eddie nodded, picked up the shotgun and backpack, and hopped over the low railing. He put the gun and pack on the bench seat and held his arms out. Martin eased his daughter into Eddie's arms. Martin then climbed onto the boat. "Walk on around to the front," said Eddie. "I'll take this," he said, indicating the Ruger, "and check inside." Martin nodded and took Tabitha from him. She stirred in his arms and said with a voice thick with sleep,
"Eddie, where are we?"
"We're on a boat, baby. Be quiet now, okay?" He walked along the narrow walkway beside the cabin and reached the front, where a barbecue and several stacked chairs were located. There were more bench seats there, too, as well as a fish-cleaning station and some storage boxes. He eased Tabitha into a chair. "Sit here for now while I find you a life vest."
"Are we going out on the boat, Daddy?"
"We are, sugar. Just a minute or two and we'll be moving." He opened the deck boxes along the edge and found one with orange life vests. Sorting through them, he found a small and pulled it out. He turned toward Tabitha. "Marty," called Eddie. "Yeah?" "Come on in here. Use that back door there." "Give me a minute," he said. He told Tabitha, "Lean forward, baby." She did, and he wrapped the vest around her back and fed her arms through, snapping the 4 plastic buckles. "Does that feel snug?"
"Yes, Daddy. Where's Pinky?"
Martin felt his heart sink. It was his daughter's security blanket. He made a decision. "Tabby, come on inside." He pulled open the door and let Tabitha walk into the cabin. He pulled the door closed behind him and saw Eddie standing next to a door. They walked toward him. "Eddie, I gotta go back to the Jeep. You find anyone?" Eddie nodded toward the open door. "Now sit there," he told Tabitha. She slid into the bench seat around the dinette table. "Don't move. I'm going to go get Pinky out of the car."
"Okay."
He leaned next to Eddie and looked into the bedroom. A man lay on the bed, a bottle of Jack Daniels next to him. He had a bandage around his left arm. "What happened? He all right?" Martin whispered. "Hell no," said Eddie. "Frank got bit in the arm by one of those bastards." "Is he gonna be all right?" Eddie shrugged. "Don't look bad, but he's in a lot of pain despite the booze. We need to get on out of here." "I have to get to the Jeep and get her stuffed animal. It's important to her." "Shotgun's on the bench out back where I dropped it, next to your backpack. Be fucking careful, and if they come at you, shoot 'em, Marty." Martin nodded toward Frank. "Before I let that happen, yeah." He opened the rear door just as a loud bump came from behind it. He pushed it closed again and pulled the .45 from the holster on his belt. "Shit," said Eddie. "One of them on the boat?" "Yeah," said Martin. "Man, I hate to shoot anyone else. But you better get used to it, man. They ain't exactly choosy about who they go after." Martin turned. "Tabby, you cover your ears. Mr. Eddie will stay here. I'll be right back." He chambered around and pulled the door open. The moment he stepped out and slammed the cabin door behind him, the woman on the deck turned her face upward and emitted a guttural snarl. Martin jumped back, pointing the gun. "Stay down," he said. "Just stay where you are." He raised his eyes to see 3 others, all men, had stopped and were clambering onto the pontoon boat. The outboard in the boat where the drunk was standing earlier was now running, but Martin saw no sign of the man they'd encountered earlier. When he turned his eyes down again, the woman was on her knees, staring at him. Her mouth was open, and her blouse was wet with blood that glistened in the moonlight. He squeezed his eyes closed and aimed the gun at her, gripping the .45 with both hands. He fired. The bullet punctured her chest, knocking her back against the bench seat. To Martin's surprise, however, she recovered almost immediately, rotating her body and trying again to get to her feet. "You okay, Marty?" yelled Eddie from inside. "She's not staying down, Eddie," called Martin. As he spoke the words, she lunged at him again, and he fired, this time the bullet penetrating her forehead, dead center. Bloody chunks of brain matter spattered the railing behind her, but Martin saw immediately that the blood did not run. It appeared to already be congealed. "Marty!" shouted Eddie. "I'm good," shouted Martin. A window of opportunity opening, he decided to just take the .45. Before leaving the boat, he nudged the woman with the toe of his tennis shoe. She did not move. Martin put the gun back into the holster and opened the door. "Eddie, come out here a sec, please." Eddie stepped out onto the back deck, staring down at the woman's body. "Shit," he said. "Came at you hard, huh?" Martin nodded. "Eddie, I shot her in the chest, right dead center, and she didn't die, man. She got knocked back, but she got up and came after me again." "Jesus Christ," said Eddie. "What the hell's happening out there?" "I don't know, but I want to get her off the boat now. Don't want Tabby to see her." Without a word, Eddie moved to one side and nodded. Martin bent down and lifted her beneath the arms while Eddie grabbed her legs. Once they got her in the air, Eddie said, "Right into the water." Martin took heavy steps toward the rail, and they hoisted her up and over, releasing her. She dropped in with a splash and sank quickly. "I'll hose off this deck. You do what you gotta do," said Eddie. "Hurry, but be damn careful." Martin nodded and jumped off the boat onto the dock. Not seeing the other 3 men who had accompanied the dead woman, he ran down the dock at full speed, careful not to trip on any of the cleats. He did not even glance at the pontoon boat when he passed by it. He reached the Jeep and pulled the door open. Pinky was right there on the passenger side floorboard. He grabbed the stuffed animal and turned to run back. Almost in the clear. Almost. Suddenly, a man, bloody and staggering, tripped over the low rail of a pontoon boat and fell face first onto the dock in front of Martin. The man rolled over onto his back and pawed at the sky. There was an enormous hole in his midsection, his intestines trailing out. To Martin's horror, the man pulled one of the thick, bloody tubes up toward his mouth and bit into it. "He's eating himself," thought Martin, bile rising in his throat. He fought the feeling and charged forward before the thing could gain its footing. When he reached the crazed man, he threw his arm out as if to grab Martin's ankle, but he was able to leap over him and keep running. "It was the drunk guy," his mind insisted. Now he's one of them. In his peripheral vision, Martin saw 3 ragged, blood-stained men stumbling toward the back of the pontoon boat. They had originally been with the woman he'd killed, and as they reached the low rail of the rear of the boat, they all tripped over it. One of them toppled off the dock and into the water. The other 2 landed beside the one eating his intestines. Martin reached the radio flyer, leapt over the rail, and opened the door. He rushed inside. "Here, baby, here's Pinky. I'll be right back." He ran back outside. "What you doing, man?" asked Eddie. "Untying the boat," shouted Martin. "Get ready to drive it out of here." Eddie hurried to the captain's seat while Martin charged back to the rear of the boat. The unsteady men were now on their feet, but they hadn't made it halfway down to the radio flyer yet. Martin leapt off the boat and quickly released the dock lines. He threw the lines onto the deck and ran back inside the boat. "Go, Eddie! You're clear!" Eddie pushed the throttle lever forward, and the boat surged from the slip, entering the channel. He cranked the wheel right, and then spun it left, heading for the open lake. Once they were underway, Martin led Tabitha to a small room with double bunks. "I have a surprise for you, Pumpkin," he said.
What?
She asked, but it was interrupted by a yawn.
I get to sleep in the top bunk?
Martin pulled her Halloween jumper from his backpack. "That, plus I brought this for you." She smiled and immediately began to undress. He got her in the jumper and lifted her to the top bunk, securing the railing. She fell asleep almost immediately with the vibration of the motor and the motion of the boat on the water. Exhausted, Martin checked his watch again. It was now approaching midnight. He found a stack of chairs tucked in a storage closet and pulled one out, placing it beside the captain's chair where Eddie steered the boat. "She all settled in?" asked Eddie. "Yeah. I say we get out to the middle somewhere and anchor. We'll both do better by the light of day." "I checked provisions," said Eddie. "Frank has this thing stocked up with food and water. Canned shit, lots of chili, stuff like that, but there's food." They allowed the silence to fill the space as the boat made its way through the moonlit night. Finally, Martin had to tell Eddie what he'd seen. "That guy? That drunk on the pontoon?" "Yeah, what about him?" asked Eddie. "He turned into one of those cannibals." Eddie looked at him. "How do you know?" Martin shook his head. Thinking about it made him sick. He was... fuck. Eddie, man, he was eating his own intestines. His stomach was torn wide open. "By what?" asked Eddie. "I'm pretty sure by the 4 that were coming down the ramp after us. That woman out there was one of them. They were the other 3. They went after the guy on the boat, and I guess they got him." "Well, he wasn't hurt when we passed him. Drunk as shit, but not hurt." "He changed fast. I'm not sure how." "Shit. I hope I don't change," said Eddie. Martin thought about what he would have to do if that happened. "So do I," he said. "Yeah, Frank seems worse than he should, only getting bit on the arm," said Eddie. "He's kind of delirious." "Maybe, Eddie. I'm wondering if those guys biting that drunk guy changed him." Eddie looked at him. "But you said his whole front was torn open." "It was, but a bite is a bite, right?" "That's zombie shit, Marty. We're here, living in reality." Martin thought about it, then thought about Tabitha. "Yeah, I know. Is there a way to secure that cabin he's in?" "Sure. There's a hook on the door to keep it from opening when the boat's underway." "Well, I'm going to lock it." "I understand," said Eddie. "Check on him first, would you?" Martin nodded and stood. He walked back to the cabin and looked inside. The curtain was open, and the moon fell on Frank's face. He lay there, his eyes closed, even as he tossed side to side in his bed, restless. Martin closed the door and latched the brass hook. When they had driven the boat for half an hour, Eddie dropped the drive into neutral and cut the engine. "Let's throw out that anchor." They located the anchor on the front of the boat and dropped it into the water. With no current and only a light breeze, it wouldn't take much to secure the houseboat. After listening to several disturbing reports over the radio, both men bid one another good night. Martin took the bunk below Tabitha, and Eddie assembled the dinette into a bed. Martin stared out the window from his bunk. The very same moon he and Tabitha had been gazing at hours earlier still hung in the sky. He thought of Tabitha's question. Is it wrong to love the stars and hate the moon? Things had irreversibly changed now. The moon was a friend to all of them. Its glow allowed them to see the new monsters through the night. An alligator swam by the houseboat as it drifted side to side, the anchor chain keeping them tethered to the muck-coated bottom of Lake Okeechobee. Beyond the banks, the world went mad. Only time would tell if any of them would survive it. At almost 5:30 a.m., noises began to interrupt the silence of the houseboat's interior. The strangely guttural sounds originated from the cabin where Frank Delanoy once lay, restless. He wasn't restless anymore. Now, he would never sleep again. This has been Zombie Moon, a short zombie tale, written by Eric A. Shelman and narrated by the author. Copyright 2021 by Eric A. Shelman. Production copyright 2024 by Eric A. Shelman.